First of all, I would like to thank you, thank very much the professionals, the National Front, for this opportunity for me to express myself on this at this very important time and on a very important issue. And thank you also Dr. Padenia for his introduction to me and also to Mr. Lalit Kahatapitia. I just would like to add before I begin that my experience within the UN system is not only as permanent representative, but I spent 10 years in the office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. I was in the UN for more than 15 years, but 10 years with the office, and I was actually involved in what is called standard setting activities, that is setting future orientations and international laws and how it is developed. So I was very involved in the negotiations from within the human rights system. And I was also involved in the work of all the special procedures, that is like the work of the special rapporteurs that you have heard of course, visiting the country and otherwise. So my experience comes from both within and outside the system, but always around on the UN system itself. I think it's very important, the timing is very important, because next week we have the beginning of the next session of the Human Rights Council, at which Sri Lanka is on the agenda. It's also an important time because this council session is going to be the litmus test for Sri Lanka's new government's foreign policy. What is that foreign policy? We have heard being mentioned as several times as neutrality. Sometimes non-alignment has been tagged on, but neutrality is very different from non-alignment. Non-alignment is based on principles, and it's based on principle that would defend the sovereignty of states that were previously under colonial rule. So the principles of sovereign equality, principles of non-intervention, non-aggression, right to self-determination, to determine your own political system, your own economic social systems. It's all part of that struggle, and importantly, the non-aligned stands for international cooperation and dialogue, peaceful coexistence against war. So that's one. We have this very clear statements made by our political leadership on Sri Lanka's neutrality policy, which, as I said, is different from non-alignment. Secondly, we have been told that we have an India first policy. Thirdly, we have been told that if we are under pressure from the United Nations, that we are going to leave the United Nations. So these are the three statements that have been made with regard to Sri Lanka's foreign policy. Now, what is going to happen at the Human Rights Council? And as I said, this is going to be the litmus test. Where we are going, where Sri Lanka is heading, what is really its position. We have already indications today, and that's what I would like to focus on. We have indications on on a certain incoherence, let's say. I wouldn't want to use duplicity, although it could, sometimes it goes to the extent of duplicity, but it's rather incoherence. On the one hand, there's a contradiction between what the government is saying today vis-a-vis the coming session of the Human Rights Council and what Sri Lanka is going to do and what it is actually doing. On the one side, so you have a resolution 30/1, which was adopted in 2015 by consensus with Sri Lanka co-sponsoring, and two subsequent resolutions which are only follow up to the substantive resolution 30/1. So on the one hand, we have government has withdrawn from that resolution. 1 year ago, the foreign minister went to the session of the Human Rights Council and said we were withdrawing for various reasons, but in particular because of the sovereignty, how it affects and damages and undermines the sovereignty of Sri Lanka and its national security and the dignity of Sri Lanka. Then you have also the government rejecting the report of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, which is going to be before the session at the Council now. And so it is on that report that the Council will be basing its discussion and any follow-up. That's on the one side. On the other side, what the government is doing right now is negotiating on a consensus resolution with hostile countries who were the sponsors of 30/1, which has been rejected. And we are now negotiating with these hostile countries on a draft that they have written down. They have crafted the draft. And secondly, that particular draft has to be, of the draft resolution that is being discussed, it must necessarily be based on that report that we have rejected. Now that report of the Bachelet report, I call it the Bachelet report, is on the implementation of a resolution that we have already withdrawn from and rejected. So what is really happening? We have rejected it on the one hand, on the other hand we are negotiating on the basis of what we have rejected, which to me indicates that there is it's a reinstation, or we are in the process of reinstating a resolution that we have already rejected and withdrawn from. And it's not just a resolution, and that's what I want to talk about. It's about legitimizing a logic, the logic behind that resolution. And I will go into that. So to start with, what is unacceptable about the Bachelet report? It's not so much about her allegations about Sri Lanka, because we have had those allegations repeated over and over again, and we have already contested it on various occasions. Whether we have done it correctly or not, I think is not that important or relevant. What is important is, what is unacceptable in that report, again, as I said, is the logic. That is where this logic of the report and the resolution is going to take Sri Lanka in the future. That logic is reflected in various concepts. And I just want to point out to a few of them which we need to understand. The first, most important, is the concept of R2P, or the so-called responsibility to protect. That particular concept is linked to the Bush doctrine of preventive and preemptive action against threats to United States, and he describes the particular threat as the unknown unknown. So you don't have to really say what it is that threatens you. And in the case of Sri Lanka, it's not, the report does not go into the threat, because it's talking about not the current situation, but what the Bachelet report is saying is, we are going to be having, something terrible is going to happen in the future in Sri Lanka based on past violations and current trends. Now that's not the mandate of the Council nor the High Commissioner, and that is not incompatible with the UN Charter request to promote and human rights in terms of the current situation, how it is the continuing violations, and in terms of how to address it with international cooperation and dialogue. So the Bush doctrine, or the R2P, is what led to the war starting with Afghanistan and to all the other wars that we have known, whether it's in Iraq or Libya or even in Syria today. I will just quote from, well, first of all, before that, what is R2P? So R2P it's a concept that was introduced by the US, funded by the Canadian government, developed and funded by the Canadian government, and led by Gareth Evans, that we all know here in Sri Lanka. And according to that logic, it is, if it is decided by, doesn't say whom, but obviously by the powerful countries, that a government is unable and unwilling to protect its citizens, then there can be external intervention to protect the citizens of that country. Now, under the UN Charter, there is no such thing. You cannot, under the UN Charter, the state is responsible to protect its own citizens. And internationally, other states and the United Nations have to cooperate with that country to help it promote human rights. You cannot interfere. It doesn't allow under any condition an interference in the country or a violation of its sovereignty. Sovereignty is an inviolable right of nations. And under no condition can any country or even the United Nations, even the Security Council, violate that sovereignty. So that is, and so that's the key line, is the inability, unwillingness of the government to protect its citizens. I'll just read you that key line in the Bachelet report. The Bachelet report says, the government has now demonstrated its inability and unwillingness to pursue a meaningful path toward accountability for international crimes and serious human rights violations. So on the basis of this assessment, that she goes on to recommend other very dangerous measures to be taken by member states individually and the Human Rights Council. And they include, and this is new where Sri Lanka is concerned, she recommends individual states and the Council to apply targeted sanctions. Now, targeted sanctions, it may be whether it's against an individual, she speaks about individuals, but it doesn't matter, it's the principle. Sanctions, which are any kind of sanctions, have to be compatible with the UN Charter. The Charter only allows the Security Council to decide on sanctions under Chapter 7 of the Charter, and only if there is a threat to international peace and security or there is a war of aggression. It cannot under no condition be used as a preventive measure for human rights violations or any violations of international law or norms. What the Bachelet report says and is asking the Council to do is also that the states, now it's not, the UN is not allowed to use sanctions in any other situation, not even the Security Council cannot. Even the Security Council decisions must be compatible with the Charter, that is this sovereignty principle. What she is saying is that individual states should apply. So that is, she's asking for unilateral coercive measures to be used against another sovereign state when those unilateral coercive measures are prohibited by the UN Charter. Every year there are resolutions, both in the Council and in the General Assembly, on the illegality of unilateral coercive measures, and that resolution, which is sponsored by Cuba, is voted with a majority against any kind of illegal unilateral coercive measures, and sanctions are one of them. The other, the measure that she recommends is universal jurisdiction and extraterritorial jurisdiction by individual states. So a state, this would of course be the West, because no other country tries national of another country for crimes committed somewhere else. So what the universal jurisdiction or extraterritorial jurisdiction means, a state can act or bring to trial somebody in a foreign country who doesn't live in their country but who is in a foreign country under its own jurisdiction for something that was committed elsewhere. So this is also illegal under the Charter because it is a violation of state sovereignty. The other important concept in that report, which is already in, and that's why I'm coming last to it, it is already in the 2015 resolution, and that is transitional justice, this concept of transitional justice. And this is very important for us also in Sri Lanka, because we need to know what transitional justice means. It means a total overhaul of the state, which is a fundamental reform of all its institutions, of state institutions and laws of the country and policies of the country, permitting this change to be made with foreign outside interference. So you have and that's what has been happening is Since 2015, we have seen that happening, and the government that is today in power has loudly protested against all these reforms that were taking place and institutional changes that were taking place, and the new laws and policies. That was actually what it was doing. It was shifting political decision making outside Sri Lanka and outside the control of the people of Sri Lanka. So you were shifting the control over the economy, you were shifting other decision making with regard to fiscal policies, with regard to land ownership. We know all the discussion we've had about MCC and BIM Xavier has to do with that, with external intervention, the imposition of a foreign law, which is the Torrens law, the Australian law, on Sri Lanka to privatize the public assets and the ownership of land, take it away from the people and give it to foreign, under foreign control. So that's what in larger terms what transitional justice means, and that's what's in the report. Sri Lanka has not rejected those. Sri Lanka has rejected those, the report, primarily on procedural grounds. That it is simply that there was no credible investigation, that there was no substantive evidence. It doesn't say that it is against the Charter to impose sanctions or to use any coercive measures against Sri Lanka. So it's not because what contains the logic of the report, they regret the form of the report. Now, why is Sri Lanka a target? We already heard Dr. Padenier referring to that. Sri Lanka is not, the US or the Western co-sponsors, who have always co-sponsored, by the way, the resolutions against Sri Lanka, but against most of third world countries. Third world countries, in principle, do not sponsor or bring resolutions on another country because of the concept, the notion of sovereign equality. They do not interfere in the matters of others, but they will call on them to cooperate, but they will not target a country. Now, what's happening? The West, since the collapse of the Soviet Union and the whole socialist bloc in the late 89-90 period, the US, we find ourselves in a unipolar world, which is under US hegemony. And the US since then has been trying to remove the main obstacle to its hegemonic power is the United Nations. And the Charter of the United Nations, which is a guarantor of state sovereignty. That is our sovereignty. It is the guarantor. So when the government says we're going to leave the United Nations, it is already an indication where we're going. So that's the main obstacle. So it has been one hand trying to shift the position and to get other countries to adopt a vision that is the US vision of a world which is a unilateral global order based on decisions made by the US and coercion by US, led by the US, where states are not sovereignly equal. So that is the two visions we are seeing combating each other. On the one hand, you hear the Chinese saying that, at least over the COVID issue. You hear the Cubans saying that over the COVID issue. Say, what is important is cooperation, international cooperation, multilateral cooperation to combat and overcome the problem of COVID, not to close up and not compete with each other and not to make money out of COVID. So those are the two visions that we're talking about. So human rights has become a weapon in the hands of the United States and its allies. So it is not, the discussions in the Human Rights Council, whether it's about Sri Lanka or any other country, is not about human rights. And we must understand that it is not about human rights. The Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights has been instrumentalized and taken hostage, in fact, by the United States, starting in the mid-90s. I was working there at the time, and I know what took place within and how they took control over the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, which is primarily funded by, run and funded by the West. So, if the government, if Sri Lanka is not, the concern of the West is not human rights, what is it? So what is the deal that we're negotiating? What are we negotiating? on procedure, on the form, on the concepts, the logic of it, the system, or are we also making a deal elsewhere? Because that is what the Human Rights Council is about. And before that, the Human Rights Commission was, resolutions were moved by Western countries against a particular country because they wanted to get something out of that country which had nothing to do with human rights. And so we have to understand what is it that's happening today in Sri Lanka? What is the context in which they are negotiating? So to understand what the deal could be, and then they will come up with some kind of text which will, of course, have all the elements. If a resolution simply says we endorse or we note the report of the High Commissioner, Bachelet report, that's enough. Because then it endorses everything and legitimizes everything that's in that report. What's going on in Sri Lanka, we will hear that from the other speakers. So I will not go into that. I will just would like to underline that today the general context is the struggle global for US hegemony, to maintain it because it considers its hegemony under threat. The US feels threatened not only from outside because of the primary enemy is China, but also internally with a possible country imploding in the United States. So we are in a very dangerous moment in the history of the world, if you like, which has also not just dangers, but it has a lot of opportunities. In this connection, I just would like to point out to Biden's new policy strategy, which is he has just announced that Pentagon is going to set up a task force to on the question of how to assess U.S. military's China strategy, and the objective is to ensure that America will win the competition in the future. And the competition is what it means is further defined by the recent Atlantic Council paper, which just came out 28th of January 21. It's called Toward a New American China Strategy. And it says that what the new administration should do is to draft a detailed operational content of an effective China strategy. And this is what Biden has been referring to earlier on. And what are those goals that the Atlantic Council is talking about? Consolidate, strengthen, expand the world order, which is based, they call, on liberal international order, but what it means is the US hegemonic order. Two is to roll back what they call growing illiberalism, by which is meant all those policies that are against the neoliberal orientation of the neoliberals in the United States primarily, and the neoconservatives to re-engineer. So you have to roll that back, any effort to counter it. The other is, it says very clearly, replace the Chinese President Xi Jinping with a more moderate party leadership. So internal intervention, completely contrary to the UN Charter, which allows for the states to determine their own political system. You can no condition intervene in a country because you disagree with their political system. So here he says replace their head of state. Then it calls on the Chinese people to challenge the Communist Party. So this is the project that we will see in the future, and Sri Lanka will be integral part of the project, precisely for, as Dr. Padini explained, for because of its strategic location here, and as close to the Quad partner of the United States, India, coherent with the India First policy. So what's wrong with negotiating? And what's wrong with consensus? Negotiation is okay, but not negotiating from a position of weakness with a hostile group. We are negotiating on their draft, which means we are negotiating on their terrain. I think we understand it. The trade unions will understand what I mean, and so will the political parties. And we know the Pohotua didn't it was not a coalition that went for the elections, but all the parties went under the Porters flag. So we should know what it means to negotiate from a position of strength. So we negotiate on their terrain, on their draft, because they have written the draft. They call for the consensus. They approach Sri Lanka for the consensus. We are negotiating with them outside the United Nations multilateral fora, because the UN has its own negotiating mechanism, and I have used it successfully in 2011, and that is, you have meetings that take place, informal meetings on a draft resolution where everybody can participate, whether all governments, NGOs, United Nations system, we can all participate, and they make comments and on the draft, and they also express their opinion on whether or not they will support it. Now, we are negotiating outside that fora. Negotiating outside that fora, there's also another reason why it is they who want to negotiate outside. It is not in our interest, but they want to do it because it isolates Sri Lanka and alienates its allies. So here you have neutrality. What neutrality really means is Sri Lanka isolated from its friends, and so they can impose any condition on you. Then you have what's wrong with that negotiation. If you're negotiating from a position of weakness, you're going to make a deal. You're going to have to make a deal because they will force you to make a deal. So my question is, so if you come to arrive at a consensus which is imposed on you on a resolution which you have already rejected, on the basis of a resolution you have rejected, on concepts that are in the report, and the report has been rejected, and now you're negotiating on the basis of those very things that we have rejected, from a position of weakness on our own. So the question is that I would like to ask our government leaders at the top, are you going to Geneva with the noose around your neck? Because that noose is here, that they would have put the noose around us here before we arrive in Geneva, and then they will pull the noose when we are in Geneva. And negotiating outside the forum is also a total disrespect for our allies, because we will go, that's also another reason why the US, UK core group, by the way, which is a NATO military alliance, which is a group from the NATO military alliance, so we cannot separate the core group from the Quad strategy. And in our region, the Quad leader is India, so they're all connected. So we will go into the council. We will not allow other states to make give their opinion, because none of those friends in our non-aligned movement, none of the developing countries or the global south will agree to this radical change in the global system of governance. So what is it that we should do? We have two options. We can prevent the resolution from being tabled, or we can call for a vote against a draft. Those are the two options. So for this we'll have to mobilize our allies. But our allies are already alienated from us. In fact, I've spoken to some of them, important allies, and I've asked them, what is your position? What's going to be your position? Informally, I asked them, what is going? Well, we are friends of Sri Lanka. We will always support Sri Lanka. But right now, we are watching. We are considering. They will not intervene if Sri Lanka, a sovereign state, is negotiating with even if they are hostile countries, even hostile to those very allies of ours, they will not interfere, because they respect the right to sovereignty of every state if they want to hang themselves. So that's the clear position of all our friendly countries. But still, in the long term, we have to work towards them. Then we have to work towards internal cohesion and unity, which is the strength of Cuba, by the way. This is the true strength of Cuba. Allies outside and internal unity and cohesion. They will do everything to divide us on ethnic lines, which is what they are doing. It is their agenda to divide us and to divide the country, and we must work on that. Then we have to negotiate within multilateral fora. If we want to negotiate from a position of strength, we negotiate within the multilateral fora, because how does the fora work? You have the developing countries organized within the non-aligned movement in Geneva or in New York in General Assembly. They are organized within what they call the G77, the Group of 77, and China. By the way, non-aligned movement, also non-aligned movement plus China. So we work from within those groups, and they express themselves. So if we are negotiating within the multilateral system, they are the majority in the council. They are the majority in the council. So we can do that. I want to, as an example of the success stories, I would like to point to this approach that we have taken. One was in 2009. There was a special session on Sri Lanka. The approach was to have a counter resolution, to counter the draft of the European Union. There was a counter resolution. We defeated the EU resolution, and we won a resolution that defended Sri Lanka's sovereignty. 2009, and we got through the war, we ended the war, we brought peace to this country. Two was 2011, September, when I was there. We had a resolution there. It was presented, sponsored by Canada, on behalf of the United States. We had at that time, I had very clear instructions from the President and from the Foreign Minister, President Mahinda Rajapaksa and Minister G.L. Pires, no negotiations. Because the moment you start to negotiate, we lose allies. The moment you start to negotiate, you lose allies. So, because then they say we are not going to be involved, we will abstain. If there's a vote, we will abstain. If there's a consensus, it's only because Sri Lanka hasn't opposed it. So, 2011, what happened? We used the multilateral negotiating platform. All the important countries' representatives, big countries from Africa, Latin America, groups of countries, non-aligned movement, spoke out and said they will not vote for the resolution, and they explained why. That evening, after the third such meeting, the Canadian ambassador called me and said, we have decided to withdraw the text because we know we're going to lose. So that was 2011, 2009, 2011. Cuba has systematically opposed any resolution, and today it is able to have the General Assembly adopt a resolution against unilateral coercive measures, that is including sanctions, blockades, all those measures, and any resolution, by the way, against Cuba, with the overall majority, resolution against the United States, the blockade, the US blockade, with only two countries opposing, United States and Israel. All of the West is with Cuba on that. So we can work towards it. There are those people who say, oh yes, but consensus, you're being confrontational. So we have to talk, because otherwise we are being confrontational. So, and if you are confrontational, they're going to hit us. No, because what is our experience with consensus? Sri Lanka's experience with consensus, which is consensus meaning compromise, conciliation, making deals outside. We're not confronting them. What happened? 1987. I don't know if you remember. In 1987, in March, there was a consensus resolution. At the time, it was called the Commission on Human Rights, not the Council then, but it's same, it's a predecessor. There was a resolution against Sri Lanka, which was adopted by consensus. What did that resolution say? It had only one operative paragraph, is to invite the Sri Lankan government, invite the ICRC, International Committee of the Red Cross, to come to Sri Lanka because of the war. So you have humanitarian, you have the ICRC that is there to ensure that humanitarian law is respected. That was all it said. What happened after that? Relatively harmless consensus. What happened? Just over 2 months later, India sent Air Force jets to drop so-called humanitarian aid over the Jaffna Peninsula. The Jaffna Peninsula was at the time controlled by the LTTE. So, first thing they did was violate Sri Lankan airspace and its territorial integrity and violate its sovereignty. Consensus resolution. 2 months later, not even 2 months later, they imposed on Sri Lanka the Indo-Lanka Accord. So the 1987 Indo-Lanka Accord is the consequence of consensus. And we are still having to deal with the consequences and the results of the Indo-Lanka Accord and the devolution package and everything else that went with it. The division of the country on ethnic lines, we are even still today having to confront that. That's 1987. The other is 2015, and I don't have to go into 2015 because we've all gone through that. 2015 consequence was all those fundamental changes that took place under Yahapalana. The signature of ACSA, don't forget, ACSA was signed under the Yahapalana. We prevented at the time MCC from being signed then because of that was also part of the larger project of the resolution, fundamental change, and also a series of other things including, but there were things that were adopted, things like in case of universal, in fact, application of universal jurisdiction under the Disappearances Act, we can send anyone that the West or any country that wants to take legal action against individual as Sri Lankan, we can extradite them. So we still have that monster in place. You have a report of the High Commissioner which calls for application of extraterritorial jurisdiction that means by the West on Sri Lanka, and we'll be ready to extradite anyone from this country. So those are the issues that we have to deal with. I think we are in a very important turning point, especially because a consensus today is going to be worse than the consensus in 2015. Mangala Samaravira, as foreign minister, was accused of betrayal for that resolution. Today's resolution is worse for one single reason, because the argument will be that there is a national consensus. There is no longer opposition like there was at the time of the 2015 resolution. Today, they will say, you have a national cohesion in the country, there's no opposition, there's not even a squeak from those people who opposed to the 2015 resolution then. Today, there's nobody opening their mouths. So the message we're sending is, we agree with the line that we're taking, so we agree with whatever comes out, this new consensus, and we will that whole notion will be reinforced, that national cohesion, by the fact that the present government has a 2/3 majority. Thank you.